Above and all things. In your name we pray, amen. Please join me in reciting the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The clerk will read a communication to the Senate.
Washington, D.C., July 28, 2026. To the Senate, under the provisions of Rule 1, Paragraph 3 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, I hereby appoint the Honorable John R. Curtis, a senator from the state of Utah, to perform the duties of the chair. Signed, Chuck Grassley, President pro tempore.
Under the previous order, the leadership time is reserved. Morning business is closed. Under the previous order, the Senate will proceed to executive session and resume consideration of the following nomination, which the clerk will report.
Nomination, Office of the Director of National Intelligence, Walter Clayton of New York to be director.
Senator from Iowa.
Today is the U.S. Capitol and National Cathedral. At those places, we honored the life of Senator Lindsey Graham. Over the past few weeks, we've mourned Senator Graham's untimely passing. Here on the Senate floor and in committees, I and my colleagues have spent time honoring his life and recalling fond memories. Senator Graham loved this country. His forceful and quick-witted presence continues to be missed. Barbara and I continue praying for Senator Graham's family and newly appointed Senator Darlene Graham. I yield the floor. Suggest the absence of a quorum.
The roll.
Ms. Alsobrooks.
Mr. President,
The senator from Alabama.
I ask unanimous consent that we dispense with the quorum call.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, 2 weeks ago, I stood alongside so many of my Senate colleagues from both sides of the aisle in a press conference announcing the Russian sanctions legislation. It was just 3 days before that this legislation and this cause lost its champion, Senator Lindsey Graham. Today, many of us attended his service at the National Cathedral. And in typical Lindsey fashion, he somehow orchestrated a vote on Ukraine's future, on peace through strength, on that very same day. While this sanctions bill quickly amassed bipartisan support across the Senate, it took more than a year of tireless work by one man and a few friends, Senator Dick Blumenthal, Senator Jeanne Shaheen, and Senator Roger Wicker, to finally get this to the floor. Even though Lindsey is not physically with us today, his presence can certainly be felt in this chamber. During his 33 years of public service, Lindsey achieved a great deal. He used his role on the Senate Appropriations Committee to make sure that South Carolina's hard-earned taxpayer dollars came back home. He was a fierce and outspoken advocate for the most vulnerable among us, the unborn. He led the fight to repeal Section 230 because he believed in protecting the next generation online. He believed in blind justice, in defending the Constitution, and in confirming judges to the bench who would uphold the law. And he was an incredible colleague, mentor, and friend. But Mr. President, this list of accomplishments, well, it doesn't even span all of the things he did. It's impressive, but he said that this legislation that we are voting on today, he told me would be the most consequential piece of legislation that he ever led and got to the president's desk. Now that's saying something. It is an honor to now help champion one of his highest priorities, and not just for Lindsey, but importantly for the doctrine in which he so deeply and passionately believed. And that, Mr. President, is peace through strength. Today, we have an opportunity to advance this legislation at a critical juncture in the war, where Russia is the weakest that it has been since the start of the war more than 4 years ago. This legislation will give the president the tools and the economic firepower that he needs to sanction individuals who fund Russian war and its machine, to stop countries from purchasing Russian oil and gas that is Putin's financial lifeline. And it will also hold the regime in Tehran accountable for fueling 47 years of terrorism around the globe. There is no reason this legislation should not advance with overwhelming bipartisan support, Mr. President, and I hope that that's what we see here today. Ukraine and the world need this war of aggression to end. As I reflected today on Lindsey's service and his life, and so many memories that I have with him, one thing came to mind when we were leaving Normandy after being there for the 80th anniversary of D-Day. He said to me, "I want you to remember how important the decisions we as political leaders make. Because if we fail to do our job, young men and women are sent into harm's way." He said, "There's no doubt the greatest generation earned that title." And he said the decision that was in front of us right now, as he reflected on all of this, was that people miscalculated Hitler. He said many were doing the exact same thing to Putin. And he believed that that miscalculation would ultimately be an enormous mistake. So, Mr. President, let's honor Lindsey's memory the best way we know how, by responding to Putin's war of aggression with a show of strength, and vote today to hold the Kremlin accountable. It is time now to get the Lindsey O. Graham Sanctioning Russia and Iran Act of 2026 to the President's desk. I hope my colleagues will join me in doing just that this evening. I yield the floor.
President.
The Democrat leader.
First, let me thank the senator from Alabama for her poignant and strong and much-needed words, and let me thank my colleague from New Hampshire for, along with Senator Blumenthal, leading the fight in this very important issue. Now, I just got back from beautiful service honoring Lindsey Graham. The service honoring Lindsey Graham today was a tribute, not only to our friend Lindsey, but to his belief that America can act as a positive force on the global stage, especially in Ukraine. Lindsey understood, I didn't agree with Lindsey on many things, but Lindsey understood something Trump has yet to learn. It takes resolve to earn respect. Instead of standing strongly behind Ukraine and squarely against Vladimir Putin, Trump has tried and failed to pander to Russia. At a time when Ukraine is turning the tide in the war against Putin, we must show the Ukrainians that our Congress and our country are fully behind them, and show Putin that his war is a losing battle, because the people of the United States and this Senate stand behind the Ukrainians. With this bill, we're going to show the Russians we mean business. We're going to impose steep mandatory sanctions to clamp down on the Russian war machine, drain the Kremlin's war chest, and truly cripple the Russian war effort. That's how you make a bully like Putin listen, by putting real pressure on him to end this devastating war. Words will not do. Actions matter. This is strong action, strong medicine. And Trump should not pass up, better not pass up this opportunity. If Trump tries to abuse these tools and continue kowtowing to Putin, he'll only make himself and our country look weaker. Make no mistake, there's an overwhelming majority in this country that wants to see Russia defeated and Ukraine victorious in this fight against Putin's authoritarian invasion. President Zelensky has reiterated that Ukraine is changing the tide in this war and gaining momentum every day. We're seeing it happen with our own eyes. Lindsey Graham spent his final days trying to help Ukraine achieve victory. We ought to do the same in the days, weeks, and months ahead. Now, on mail-in voting, Trump's desperation to avoid, this is my opening statement because we just opened at 5 o'clock. Trump's desperation to avoid accountability at the polls this November grows every passing day. Yesterday, Trump begged the Supreme Court to help him block mail-in ballots in every corner of the country. Hey, Donald, did you also tell the court that you yourself voted by mail just a few months ago? Everyone knows that mail-in voting is safe and secure, and apparently so do you. It's absurd. Trump is pleading for the highest court in the land to make it harder for millions of Americans to vote using the same method he used to submit his ballot earlier this year. We all know why. Trump sees the writing on the wall for November and thinks he can escape accountability from voters. Trump knows just how bad a bind he's in. Trump can't defeat the crippling costs, or Trump can't defend the crippling costs working families see every time they go to the grocery store or the gas pump. Trump can't defend the rampant corruption that has allowed his family to make billions of dollars off the American people. And Trump can't defend the unrelenting chaos he's unleashed in American streets. But Trump can't defend himself from Americans' wrath at the ballot box in November either. Senate Democrats are working round the clock to make sure every eligible American voter can cast their ballot without interference, intimidation, obstruction. You can hear it in every lawsuit, executive order, and desperate plea to the court. Trump is afraid of the voters, not of voter fraud. I yield the floor.
Senator from New Hampshire.
Mr. President, I come to the floor today in support of the Lindsey O. Graham Sanctioning Russia and Iran Act. I want to applaud Senator Schumer's comments about supporting this legislation to try and end the war in Ukraine. I applaud Senator Britt, Senator Wicker, and of course, Senator Blumenthal, who has worked for over a year to get to this point, and thank Senator Darlene Graham for her efforts to support this legislation. I had the privilege of traveling with Senator Graham earlier this month on what tragically turned out to be his final Codel. We all know that he was a tireless advocate for Ukraine. He knew that Ukrainians stand on the front lines of freedom. This legislation is designed to cut off Vladimir Putin's most important resource in his war against Ukraine, his money. And you can see from this poster, what this legislation does is impose mandatory sanctions that target Russia's war machine. It clamps down on Russia's shadow fleet. It strengthens financial and export restrictions, and it enforces targeted duties on top purchasers of Russian oil and gas. This includes sanctions against the Russian Central Bank, which keeps Russia's war economy afloat, Sberbank, the country's largest lender, and Gazprom Bank, which has helped finance Russia's energy exports. It also sanctions Russia's energy sector and the executives who run it. The major state energy projects that generate billions for the Kremlin, and future Arctic energy projects designed to keep that revenue flowing. For the first time, this bill would impose sanctions on the Russia shadow fleet and any foreign vessel that's used by the Russian government for sanctions evasion. It would impose tariffs on imports from the top 5 countries buying Russia crude oil or natural gas. And it would impose tariffs on imports from those top 5 countries facilitating Russia's oil sanctions invasion. And we know who topped that list in 2025. It was China. They topped both lists. They continue buying Russian oil even as Russia kills civilians and kidnaps Ukrainian children. And as sponsors of this bill, we've worked hard to protect our allies, those who have worked hard to get off of Russian natural gas purchases. Now, some have raised concerns about the tariff provisions in this bill. They say that President Trump has used tariffs indiscriminately to target our closest allies. Well, I agree. But in the case of this bill, Congress is explicitly directing these tariffs for one unambiguous purpose: to increase the pressure on Vladimir Putin and end his unprovoked war against Ukraine. That's why this bill is narrowly targeted at the worst actors supporting Russia. I saw the consequences of Putin's strategy firsthand earlier this year on a congressional visit to Odessa. It was winter. Ours was the first official congressional delegation to visit Odessa. The Russians had destroyed every bridge going into the city, except the one that our convoy crossed over, that the engineers, Ukrainian engineers, had managed to patch together. And sadly, it's not a new phenomenon, because Russia deliberately targets civilian infrastructure to break the will of the Ukrainian people. And it attacks American businesses. It attacks the grain silos and ships that help feed the world. And you can see what they're doing. This is a rescue worker at a Philip Morris factory in Kharkiv. They've attacked Coca-Cola, Cargill, Mondelez. Others have been deliberately hit. And when we met with business people who were working for those American companies in Ukraine, they said they believed they were being deliberately targeted by Russia. So for those people who are concerned about these tariffs, consider the cost of continuing to do nothing. Pressure is the only language Vladimir Putin understands. It's the only thing he responds to. And that's why it's critical that we pass the Lindsey O. Graham Sanctioning Russia and Iran Act today. The Ukrainians are making great progress. They're striking deep inside of Russia. They're targeting defense factories and oil facilities that enable Putin's war. And now is the time for us to do everything possible to put pressure on Putin. President Zelensky supports this bill. Everything that reduces Russia's revenues reduce the ability for Russia to continue the war against Ukraine. As ranking member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, I believe this is the only bill that Congress has before it that has a realistic path forward for imposing new sanctions on Russia. This is our best opportunity to support Ukraine, who are defending not just their country, but the rest of Europe from an increasingly aggressive Russia. And so, Mr. President, I call on all my colleagues to vote for this bill to send Vladimir Putin a bipartisan message in a language that he understands. Let's pass the Lindsey O. Graham Sanctioning Russia and Iran Act. I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from Mississippi.
First, I ask unanimous consent to waive the mandatory quorum call with respect to the cloture motion on the motion to proceed to calendar 454 H.R. 5334.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. And now let me join with my colleagues from New Hampshire and Alabama in urging a strong yes vote on the motion to proceed to Lindsey Graham's sanctions bill. A number of us gathered today, as we've already heard, at the National Cathedral for Senator Lindsey Graham's funeral. And in a few moments, we will vote to advance a bill that Lindsey Graham made possible. During the past few days, we have heard a number of stories about Lindsey Graham's many idiosyncrasies. His endless energy, he's been called the Energizer Bunny, his quotable jokes, his non-quotable quips, his one-of-a-kind personality. We also remembered his steadfast love for freedom and his intolerance for tyrants. The bill that we will vote on in a few moments reflects those aspects of his personality. I have suggested that it is his greatest political achievement. It took a senator like Lindsey Graham to bring this bill so far. In this environment, with these stakes, he brought together so many parties. It seems he did this almost through the sheer force of his will. I have seen that drive for 32 years, since we came to Washington together as freshmen in 1994. Again, I say, this could turn out to be Lindsey Graham's greatest legislative achievement. The Lindsey Graham sanctions bill will advance the cause of freedom, and it will combat Vladimir Putin's war machine. It will go after Vladimir Putin, his inner circle, and the shadow fleet they use to evade sanctions. It will hold accountable those who purchase the most Russian oil and gas. It will also take aim at China's investments in Russian weapons production, and it will maintain sanctions pressure on Iran. These policies will save human lives. They'll pave the way for even more impressive battlefield achievements by Ukraine. The Ukrainians have been resourceful from day one. For 4 years, the freedom fighters have managed to stand against a country 4 times the size of theirs. And today, Ukraine is using long-range drone strikes to take the war to Russia. I hope to meet with President Zelensky of Ukraine soon. He regularly refers to these drone strikes as long-range sanctions. Let's give Ukraine even more sanctions, even more tools to fight back against the dictator Putin. This bill will be a moral achievement, Mr. President. It's a clear statement about the aggressor in Russia and the nation he is attacking. Ukraine targets facilities in Russia used to wage war. On the other hand, Vladimir Putin targets apartments, neighborhoods, churches, and corner stores. As Ukraine defends its homeland, Vladimir Putin callously sends the sons of Russia into bloodshed. He's not persuaded by appeals to human rights. I've made no secret of my complete disgust for the dictator Vladimir Putin and for his many war crimes against the Ukrainian people throughout this unprovoked conflict. If we've learned anything about the Russian despot, Vladimir Putin, over the course of this war, it's that the slaughter of civilians and even his own Russian troops gives him no pause. His soulmates are the dead dictators of the previous century, Mr. President. Pol Pot, Hitler, Mussolini, and Stalin. Vladimir Putin's name deserves to be stated among those desperate war criminals. He disregards human life, but he does prize the strength of his war machine, and for this, Putin relies on his energy sales, and that's what we're getting to with this bill. This legislation will help curtail those energy sales. It will put maximum economic pressure on Vladimir Putin. This is the one thing, apparently, the only thing he understands. President Trump and President Zelensky have long extended the hand of peace. Time and again, Putin has answered with more violence, more destruction, and more innocent Ukrainian and Russian lives snuffed out. Lindsey Graham understood Putin's calculation, and he wrote a bill to hit Putin where it hurts. We'll have a chance to act on that bill today. I expect an overwhelming majority vote in favor. Thank you, Mr. President.
The senator from Idaho.
Mr. President, fellow senators, I come to the floor here to support the bill that we're going to vote on here pretty quickly, and that is on a Russia and Iran sanctions bill. It's no secret that this thing has been worked on for a long, long time. It's also no secret that this is a bipartisan effort. I think you heard both sides speaking about this, and there's good reason for that. At nearly 4.5 years, Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine has dragged on far too long. We all want to see this war end. Now, with Russia's forces taking heavy losses on the battlefield and its economy showing signs of strain, Putin's war machine is in crisis. It is time to ramp up the pressure on Russia and finally bring this conflict to an end. To help accomplish this, this bill would impose sanctions against two of our foremost adversaries at the current time, Russia and Iran, as they deepen cooperation and coordination against U.S. interests. Along with many provisions in this final bill, I worked to secure language that will target Russia's illicit shadow fleet of ships that is used to prop up its energy sector and fund its war against Ukraine. This has been a very, very significant ongoing problem. If you can stop them from shipping the oil, you stop the money flow. This bill gives the president the tools and the leverage he needs to finally bring a lasting peace to Ukraine and work towards ending the fight in the Middle East. For many reasons, peace and stability in Europe are in America's interests. Russian aggression threatens this stability, and it can't be tolerated. I urge my colleagues to pass this legislation and send it to the president's desk as soon as possible. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
The senator from Tennessee.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Before I begin my remarks, I commend each of my colleagues who've come to the floor to speak on the Russia sanctions bill and how important it is that we get this passed. This is a measure I have supported, and I am so pleased we're finally taking a vote and taking action on that. Mr. President, what we have been hearing a lot about in our office and what Tennesseans are talking about is this issue of fraud. And what we have seen is how some of these Democrat-run state governments have just gone crazy with committing fraud. There is fraud in Medicaid, in immigration, in elections. Elected officials have a responsibility to prevent fraud. Voters expect them to be good stewards of taxpayer dollars. They expect them to uphold the principle of one person, one vote. Instead, we have seen Democrats put fraudsters and illegal aliens and their issues ahead of any concerns that are expressed by taxpayers and by American citizens. We should all be grateful that President Trump and his administration are bringing this malfeasance to an end. Here are some examples. Last week, Health and Human Services froze $1 billion in Medicaid payments to California and Minnesota for allowing fraud to flourish in their states. Now, of course, you heard the hue and cry about this was not fair. But fraud has been persistent in their Medicaid programs. Now, under Gavin Newsom's watch, government spending in California has surged from $209 billion a year to more than $350 billion. That is your tax dollar that you are sending to the federal government. The federal government sends it to California and to Minnesota. And what do? They waste it. They allow fraud to take up those dollars that hardworking taxpayers have earned and sent to the federal government. Looking at how this Medicaid spending has exploded is unbelievable. The California state auditor has repeatedly flagged billions of these expenditures as questionable payments, including to potential fraud operations. But state Democrats have continued to push the money out the door. The administration noted that $221 million of the frozen funds would have gone to people with unsatisfactory immigration status. That is, illegal aliens, individuals that are not here legally. So that's the California Medicaid situation. Now, Governor Walz in Minnesota has similarly overseen billions of dollars in fraud, especially through their state's Medicaid program. Fake child care centers, fake autism therapy services, fake senior care facilities, all of it fake, billing millions for non-existent services. This fraud could help explain why Minnesota has the second highest per enrollee Medicaid spending under Obamacare. The second highest. California and Minnesota are far from alone. Dr. Oz, who serves as CMS administrator, recently warned that Chinese organized criminal groups in New York have stolen millions of dollars through fraudulent Medicaid billings. Here's an example of what is happening in New York State. Within a single 1-mile radius in New York City, 64 adult care centers billed to Medicaid, which distributed, get this, $2.1 billion in one neighborhood. That is 64
adult care centers within a 1-mile radius. These centers must be door to door. So many of them. When I talk to Tennesseans, they cannot believe that this is tolerating, that it's allowed to happen. Where were the people that were supposed to be in charge? Why are these criminals allowed to continue to steal from the American taxpayer? The simple answer is that Democrats have allowed these schemes to happen for whatever reason. They just look the other way. It's indefensible, so our colleagues on the other side of the aisle have tried to duck accountability. During a recent Senate Homeland Security Committee hearing on Medicaid fraud, just one of the committee's 7 Democrat members showed up. Just one. They don't want to know about it. While encouraging fraud in government programs, blue states have opened the door to fraud in federal elections. Last week, New Jersey disclosed that the state registered 6,600 non-citizens to vote due to a glitch. Among them, at least 400 cast ballots in federal elections. This should come as no surprise. New Jersey is one of 14 states that does not require any ID whatsoever to vote, and it refuses to compare its voter rolls with the federal SAVE database at the Department of Homeland Security, which verifies every person's immigration status. States that do use the SAVE database, including Texas and Ohio, have discovered thousands of non-citizens on their rolls. President Trump recently announced that DHS estimates that approximately 278,000 non-citizens are registered to vote nationwide, a figure that is likely an undercount because blue states refuse to cooperate with the administration's anti-fraud efforts. While Democrats are encouraging fraud, Republicans are working to root it out. Just this month, I joined several of my Republican colleagues in launching the Senate Anti-Fraud Task Force, which will work hand in hand with the administration to examine waste, fraud, abuse in federal programs. I also introduced the Fraud Accountability Act to make clear that fraud counts as a deportable offense under the Immigration and Nationality Act, and that any deportable offense can lead to denaturalization. Republicans are also continuing to fight to get past the Save America Act, which would require individuals to present an ID to cast a ballot and proof of U.S. citizenship to register to vote. It would also require states to remove non-citizens from their voter rolls. This legislation is good old common sense. If we need to break it apart and pass it piece by piece, then that is what we should do. The goal is to get it across the finish line. My Election Security Partnership Act, which I led alongside the late Senator Lindsey Graham, would incentivize states to submit their voter registration list to DHS to identify ineligible voters, including non-citizens. Mr. President, the era of rampant fraud is over. It is coming to an end. Republicans are delivering accountability.
Mr. President,
Senator from Arkansas.
I speak today in support of Mr. Jay Clayton's nomination to be the next Director of National Intelligence. Earlier this month, Mr. Clayton appeared before the Senate Intelligence Committee, where he answered hundreds of written questions for the record and provided detailed testimony on his approach to serving in this new role. As part of these discussions, Mr. Clayton assured the committee that he would assist our efforts to return the Office of the Director of National Intelligence to its original size, scope, and mission. He also pledged to work with the committee to secure the essential funding the intelligence community needs. Based on the shortcomings that my committee staff has identified, I project that any supplemental appropriations bill or reconciliation bill must include around $40 billion for our intelligence agencies. I look forward to working with Mr. Clayton to meet this vital need. Given his past professional experience, Mr. Clayton is well qualified to serve as the Director of National Intelligence. As the United States Attorney for the Southern District of New York, Mr. Clayton went after some of the worst national security threats. He's overseen numerous high-profile cases, including the indictment of Venezuelan dictator Nicolas Maduro and the prosecution of an Iran-backed terrorist connected to multiple attempted terror attacks in the United States. Time and again, Mr. Clayton has worked hand in glove with our intelligence agencies and counterterrorism personnel to put these savages behind bars and keep America safe. Based on Mr. Clayton's testimony and the many conversations I've had with him over the last few months, I can say with confidence that his reputation for leading with integrity precedes him. I'm pleased to support his nomination, and I urge my colleagues to vote in favor of his confirmation. Mr. President, I yield the floor.
We'll call the roll.
Ms. Alsor-Brooks.
The senator from Oregon.
I ask unanimous consent to vacate the quorum call.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I speak today in opposition to the nomination of Jay Clayton to be Director of National Intelligence. He has repeated baseless conspiracy theories about American elections, refused to acknowledge who won the 2020 election, and participated in an abusive investigation of American journalists while providing false testimony to Congress about that investigation. It has been clear for months that under this administration, the main qualification to be DNI is the willingness to use the position to spread conspiracy theories about elections and to help Donald Trump make it harder for Americans to vote. Even before his nomination, Mr. Clayton decided he'd show how eager he is to serve as Trump's election conspiracy wingman. Now, he is the U.S. Attorney in the Southern District of New York, yet we all saw him on television talking about elections in California and insisting, without any evidence, that America was doing a terrible job with election integrity. I was especially alarmed by his conspiracy mongering about vote by mail. That's how my home state of Oregon has been voting successfully for years. On June 8th, just a few days before he was nominated, Mr. Clayton was on television talking about how a, quote, one group approach was using vote by mail dishonestly. That is ridiculous. The first two senators elected by mail were a Democrat and a Republican. Vote by mail benefits rural voters who live far away from polling stations. Vote by mail benefits older people who may not be able to drive. It's never been partisan, certainly not until Donald Trump, aided by people like Jay Clayton, made it a part of the attack on American democracy. Mr. Clayton didn't offer a shred of evidence to support his conspiracy theories, so I asked him point blank, Mr. President, who were these mythical election bandits? In his responses to written questions, he said he was, quote, only asking questions. Mr. President, that's the stock and trade for conspiracy theorists. The moment they're asked to provide some evidence, any evidence for claims, they fall back on, I was just asking questions. That's my excuse. It's fundamentally dishonest. It's also behavior that shouldn't be tolerated in someone responsible for providing Congress and the public assessments based on actual intelligence. Now, as we all saw during his disastrous nomination hearing, Mr. Clayton also refused to acknowledge the simple fact about Joe Biden winning the 2020 election. Everybody knows the truth here. The only reason to avoid the question is to satisfy the Trump ego. But that's what Mr. Clayton did, signaling Donald Trump and the whole country that he is never going to stand up to Donald Trump, not ever. I'm also deeply concerned about Mr. Clayton's role in the abusive subpoenas issued to the journalists at the New York Times. Mr. Clayton is the U.S. Attorney in the Southern District. He signed the subpoenas. He's responsible for the effort to intimidate the press. He's also responsible for the numerous mistakes and errors committed by the attorneys under him, which even included a subpoena to a journalist's mother. This whole mess came out in a court hearing last week, where not only did the judge criticize the government attorneys, the government itself, Mr. President, acknowledged its numerous errors and mistakes before eventually withdrawing the subpoenas. All that's bad enough, but it also raises serious questions about Mr. Clayton's testimony to the Intelligence Committee that I sit on. 8 days before that court hearing in which the government acknowledged its mistakes, Mr. Clayton testified repeatedly that the government had followed all the required procedures. That was obviously false. The only question is whether Mr. Clayton knew it at the time that his testimony was false. If he didn't know, then he had no idea what his own office was doing, despite having signed the subpoena. which isn't a great justification for somebody to lead the intelligence agencies. If he did know, then he may have willfully misled Congress. This is a vitally important question that the Senate should continue to look at rather than rushing to confirm Mr. Clayton. Now, there are other examples of how Mr. Clayton is willing to say anything in defense of Donald Trump. In May, he went on television and defended the decision to immunize Donald Trump and his family from a tax audit. He said, and I quote, "It was a pretty good deal for the government." Well, it was certainly a good deal for Donald Trump and the family, but it wasn't so great for everyday Americans who don't control the IRS. And it wasn't a good deal for the government either. In fact, a judge recently found that the so-called settlement was improper, had no viable basis in law or fact, and was an abdication of the government's responsibility to zealously defend the interests of the United States. Yet Mr. Clayton was happy to go on television and defend the corruption. Finally, as U.S. Attorney, Mr. Clayton has been the lead of the administration's investigation into Jeffrey Epstein. He was responsible for the inexcusable release of information on Epstein's victims. As for his other actions related to the investigation in the Epstein files, he has refused to say. But Mr. President, someday there will be transparency about how this administration handled the Epstein case, and Mr. Clayton's full role, his full role, is going to come out. Jay Clayton has no business being confirmed for this role. He has repeatedly demonstrated his eagerness to support Donald Trump's conspiracy theories and corruption. He participated in the abuse of the justice system to try to intimidate the press. And he has provided false testimony to Congress during his own confirmation hearing. Tonight, I urge senators to oppose this nomination, and I yield back.
Senator from Oregon.
I would note the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call a roll.
Ms. Also Brooks. President,
Pretty whip.
I ask unanimous consent the quorum call be vitiated.
Without objection.
I ask unanimous consent to start the vote immediately.
Without objection. Occurs on the nomination.
As for the yeas and nays.
Is there a sufficient second? There appears to be. The clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Alsobrooks, Mr. Armstrong, Ms. Baldwin, Mr. Banks, Mr. Barrasso.
We'll see how long.
Mr. Bennett, Mrs. Blackburn, Mr. Blumenthal, Ms. Blunt Rochester, Mr. Booker, Mr. Bozeman, Mrs. Britt, Mr. Budd, Ms. Cantwell, Mrs. Capito, Mr. Cassidy, Ms. Collins, Mr. Coons, Mr. Cornyn, Ms. Cortez Masto, Mr. Cotton, Mr. Kramer, Mr. Crapo, Mr. Cruz, Mr. Curtis, Mr. Dane, Ms. Duckworth, Mr. Durbin, Ms. Ernst, Mr. Fetterman, Mrs. Fisher, Mr. Gallego, Mrs. Gillibrand, Ms. Graham, Mr. Grassley, Mr. Haggerty, Ms. Hassan, Mr. Hawley, Mr. Heinrich, Mr. Hickenlooper, Ms. Hirono, Mr. Hoven, Mr. Husted, Mrs. Hyde-Smith, Mr. Johnson, Mr. Justice, Mr. Kane, Mr. Kelly, Mr. Kennedy, Mr. Kim, Mr. King, Ms. Klobuchar, Mr. Langford, Mr. Lee, Mr. Lujan, Ms. Lummis, Mr. Markey, Mr. Marshall, Mr. McConnell, Mr. McCormick, Mr. Merkley, Mrs. Moody, Mr. Moran, Mr. Marino. Ms. Murkowski, Mr. Murphy, Mrs. Murray, Mr. Ossoff, Mr. Padilla, Mr. Paul, Mr. Peters, Mr. Reed, Mr. Ricketts, Mr. Risch, Ms. Rosen, Mr. Rounds, Mr. Sanders, Mr. Schatz, Mr. Schiff, Mr. Schmidt, Mr. Schumer, Mr. Scott of Florida, Mr. Scott of South Carolina, Mrs. Shaheen, Mr. Sheehy, Ms. Slotkin, Ms. Smith, Mr. Sullivan, Mr. Thune, Mr. Tillis, Mr. Tuberville, Mr. Van Hollen, Mr. Warner, Mr. Warnock, Ms. Warren, Mr. Welch, Mr. Whitehouse, Mr. Wicker, Mr. Wyden, Mr. Young. Senators voting in the affirmative: Armstrong, Barrasso, Bozeman, Capito, Cassidy, Cornyn, Cotton, Crapo, Curtis, Daines, Ernst, Fisher, Grassley, Husted, Hyde-Smith, Justice, Kennedy, Langford, Lummis, McCormick, Moran, Marino, Murkowski, Ricketts, Rounds, Scott of Florida, Scott of South Carolina, Tillis, and Wicker. Senators voting in the negative: Alsobrooks, Baldwin, Bennett, Blunt-Rochester, Booker, Cantwell, Coons, Durbin, Fetterman, Gallego, Gillibrand, Hassan, Heinrich, Hickenlooper, Kelly, Kim, King, Klobuchar, Merkley, Padilla, Peters, Reed, Rosen, Schatz, Schiff, Slotkin, Smith, Warnock, Welch, Whitehouse, and Wyden. Mr. Murphy. Mr. Murphy, no. Mr. Young. Mr. Young, aye. Mrs. Moody. Mrs. Moody, aye. Mr. Sheehy. Mr. Sheehy, aye. Mrs. Blackburn. Mrs. Blackburn, aye. Mr. Kramer. Mr. Kramer, aye. Mr. Sullivan. Mr. Sullivan, aye. Ms. Collins. Ms. Collins, aye. Mrs. Murray. Mrs. Murray, no. Ms. Hirono. Ms. Hirono, no. Mr. Paul. Mr. Paul, aye. Ms. Duckworth. Ms. Duckworth, no. Mr. Johnson. Mr. Johnson, aye. Mr. Budd. Mr. Budd, aye. Mr. Thune. Mr. Thune, aye. Mr. Markey. Mr. Markey, no. Mr. Ossoff. Mr. Ossoff, no. Mr. Risch. Mr. Risch, aye. Mr. Sanders. Mr. Sanders, no. Mr. Lujan. Mr. Lujan, no. Ms. Warren. Ms. Warren, no. Mr. Blumenthal. Mr. Blumenthal, no. Mr. Banks. Mr. Banks, aye. Mr. Hawley. Mr. Hawley, aye. Mrs. Shaheen. Mrs. Shaheen, no. Mrs. Britt. Mrs. Britt, aye. Mr. Schmidt. Mr. Schmidt, aye. Mr. Van Hollen. Mr. Van Hollen, no. Mr. Tuberville. Mr. Tuberville, aye. Ms. Cortez Masto. Ms. Cortez Masto, no. Mr. Haggerty. Mr. Haggerty, aye. Mr. Lee. Mr. Lee, aye. Mr. Hoven. Mr. Hoven, aye. Mr. Warner. Mr. Warner, no. Mr. Cruz. Mr. Cruz, aye. Mr. Schumer. Mr. Schumer, no. Mr. Kane. Mr. Kane, no. Mr. Marshall. Mr. Marshall, aye.
On this vote, the yeas are 51, the nays are 47, and the nomination is confirmed. Under the previous order, the motion to reconsider is considered made and laid upon the table, and the President will be immediately notified of the Senate's action. The clerk will report the motion to invoke cloture.
Cloture motion, we, the undersigned senators, in accordance with the provisions of Rule 22 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, do hereby move to bring to a closed debate on the motion to proceed to calendar number 454, H.R. 5334, an act to amend the Internal Revenue Code of 1986 to allow early childhood educators to take the educator expense deduction and for other purposes, signed by 17 senators.
Under the previous order, the mandatory quorum call under Rule 22 has been waived. The question is it the sense of the Senate that debate on the motion to proceed to H.R. 5334, an act to amend the Internal Revenue Code of 1986 to allow early childhood educators to take the educator expense deduction and for other purposes, shall be brought to a close? The yeas and nays are mandatory under the rule. The clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Alsobrooks, Mr. Armstrong, Ms. Baldwin, Mr. Banks, Mr. Barrasso, Mr. Bennett, Mrs. Blackburn. Mr. Blumenthal, Ms. Blunt Rochester, Mr. Booker, Mr. Bozeman, Mrs. Britt, Mr. Budd, Mrs. Capito, Mr. Cassidy, Ms. Collins, Mr. Coons, Mr. Cornyn, Ms. Cortez Masto, Mr. Cotton, Mr. Kramer, Mr. Crapo, Mr. Cruz, Mr. Curtis.
So, it's members of national legislatures of foreign countries and members of the European senators and ministers.
Mr. Daines, Ms. Duckworth, Mr. Durbin, Ms. Ernst, Mr. Fetterman,
Sergeant Arms, House.
Mrs. Fisher,
I think that's, that's not on the list. Whatever, but we're in a roll call vote, so we can't do anything right now.
Mr. Gallego, Mrs. Gillibrand, Ms. Graham, Mr. Grassley,
I mean, I get it, but like, that's not.
Mr. Haggerty, Ms. Hassan, Mr. Hawley, Mr. Heinrich, Mr. Hickenlooper, Ms. Hirono,
Yeah, but we're in a vote, so they, yeah, exactly. Okay, I just want to double check. Okay.
Mr. Hoven,
No speech tonight? No, sir, I'm sparing you.
Mr. Husted, Mrs. Hyde-Smith,
It is members of national legislatures or members of the European Parliament. We are in a vote, so we cannot ask consent. You're welcome.
Mr. Johnson, Mr. Justice, Mr. Kane, Mr. Kelly, Mr. Kennedy, Mr. Kim, Mr. King, Ms. Klobuchar, Mr. Langford, Mr. Lee, Mr. Lujan, Ms. Lummis, Mr. Markey, Mr. Marshall,
Looks like 61.
Mr. McConnell, Mr. McCormick, Mr. Merkley, Mrs. Moody, Mr. Moran, Mr. Moreno, Ms. Murkowski, Mr. Murphy, Mrs. Murray, Mr. Ossoff, Mr. Padilla, Mr. Paul, Mr. Peters, Mr. Reed, Mr. Ricketts, Mr. Risch, Ms. Rosen, Mr. Rounds, Mr. Sanders, Mr. Schatz, Mr. Schiff, Mr. Schmidt, Mr. Schumer, Mr. Scott of Florida, Mr. Scott of South Carolina, Mrs. Shaheen, Mr. Sheehy, Ms. Slotkin, Ms. Smith, Mr. Sullivan, Mr. Thune, Mr. Tillis, Mr. Tuberville, Mr. Van Hollen, Mr. Warner, Mr. Warnock, Ms. Warren, Mr. Welch, Mr. Whitehouse, Mr. Wicker, Mr. Wyden, Mr. Young. Senators voting in the affirmative: Also Brooks, Armstrong, Baldwin, Banks, Blackburn, Booker, Budd, Cantwell, Capito, Cassidy, Cornyn, Cortez Masto, Kramer, Crapo, Cruz, Curtis, Duckworth, Durbin, Ernst, Fetterman, Gillibrand, Grassley, Haggerty, Hawley, Heinrich, Hickenlooper, Hoven, Husted, Hyde-Smith, Justice, Kane, Kennedy, King, Langford, Lee, Lujan, Marshall, McCormick, Merkley, Moran, Moreno, Peters, Reed, Ricketts, Rosen, Rounds, Schatz, Schmidt, Scott of South Carolina, Sheehy, Slotkin, Smith, Thune, Tillis, Tuberville, Van Hollen, Warner, Whitehouse, Wicker, Young. Mr. Kelly, aye. Mr. Bennett, aye. Mr. Schiff, aye. Mr. Blumenthal, aye. Mrs. Britt, aye. Mr. Sullivan, aye. Mr. Coons, aye. Senators voting in the negative: Blunt Rochester, Hirono, Paul, Sanders, Warren. Mr. Risch, aye. Ms. Klobuchar, aye. Mr. Warnock, aye. Mrs. Shaheen, aye. Mr. Schumer, aye. Mr. Welch, no. Mr. Markey, no. Mr. Johnson, aye. Ms. Hassan, no. Mr. Wyden, no. Mrs. Murray, aye. Mr. Ossoff, no. Mr. Kim, no. Mr. Barrasso, aye. Mr. Daines, aye. Mrs. Moody, aye. Mr. Padilla, no. Ms. Lummis, aye. But Mr. Scott. Mr. Scott of Florida, aye. Mr. Gallego, aye. Mr. Murphy, aye. Ms. Collins, aye. Ms. Murkowski, aye. Mr. Cotton, aye. Mr. Bozeman, aye. Mrs. Fisher, aye.
On this vote, the yeas are 86, the nays are 12. 3/5 of the Senate duly chosen are and sworn. Having voted in the affirmative, the motion is agreed to. The clerk will report the motion to proceed.
Motion to proceed to calendar number 454, H.R. 5334, an act to amend the Internal Revenue Code of 1986 and so forth and for other purposes.
Mr. President,
Senator from Arkansas.
I ask unanimous consent that when the Senate completes its business today, it stand adjourned until 10:30 a.m. on Wednesday, July 29th. That following the prayer and pledge, the journal of proceedings be approved to date, the morning hour be deemed expired, the time for the two leaders be reserved for their use later in the day, morning business be closed, and the Senate resume consideration of the motion to proceed to calendar number 454, H.R. 5334, post-closure. Further, that the Senate recess tomorrow from 12:30 to 2:15 p.m. for the weekly conference meetings, and that all time during leader remarks, recess, and adjournment count post-closure on the motion to proceed to H.R. 5334.
Without objection.
If there's no further business to come before the Senate, I ask that it stand adjourned under the previous order following the no doubt scintillating remarks of Senator Welch.
Without objection.
I thank the senator.
Senator from Vermont.
Mr. President.
The senator from Vermont.
Thank you. We are faced today with two urgent and compelling foreign policy priorities: ending the war in Iran and winning the war in Ukraine. The war in Iran is increasing the world price of oil, enriching Putin's Russian wanton war machine. On February 27th, just before the start of the U.S.-Iran war, oil was at $70 a barrel. Last week, it was up to $100 a barrel. And if the Strait of Hormuz is closed again, experts warn prices could surge up to $125 a barrel, driving up fuel, fertilizer, and food costs. And with every $10 increase in global oil prices, Putin's war machine receives a windfall of more than $1.5 billion a month. $1.5 billion a month in extra revenue. If oil reaches $125 a barrel, as many experts predict, Putin's windfall would be $9 billion a month, or $108 billion a year. It's a very compelling reason why, to win the war in Ukraine, we must end the war in Iran. It is also a reason why taking up the Graham-Blumenthal Russia sanctions bill is urgent. From the first day of Putin's savage attack on Ukraine, thank you. From the first day of Putin's savage attack on Ukraine, no one has been a more stalwart defender of Ukrainian victory than our departed colleague, Senator Lindsey Graham. He and Senator Blumenthal had a compelling insight. You hurt Russia by going after the buyers of Russian oil. And the way to go after the buyers was by imposing a tariff on the major buyers of Russian oil, making it too costly for those buyers to continue purchasing it. It would starve the Russian beast of the revenue, fueling its cruel aggression. The language in that original bill by Senator Blumenthal and by Senator Graham was specific and limited. Buyers of Russian oil would be targeted and tariffed. It was a limited and specific delegation of congressional tariff authority that could be used for the limited and sole purpose of cutting off oil revenue to Russia, all for the purpose of assisting U.S. efforts to help defend Ukrainian freedom and repel Russian aggression. That's why the original Graham-Blumenthal bill had 84 bipartisan co-sponsors, myself enthusiastically among them. But we are now on the threshold and are now considering a new version of the Graham-Blumenthal bill, one that Senator Graham and we understand the White House has signed off on. But we have to remind ourselves, in any delegation of congressional tariff authority to the executive, the statutory language must be specific and it must be limited to the purpose of squeezing Russia in its oil revenues. To achieve Senator Graham's goal, starving Russia of its oil revenues, care must be taken in the drafting to guarantee that outcome and that outcome only, and not language that would facilitate other outcomes. In broad terms, the revised Graham-Blumenthal bill does two things. Number one, it imposes tariffs at the discretion of the executive of up to 100% on the top 5 purchasers of Russian oil and gas. Number two, it allows the executive to impose 100% tariffs on the top 5 countries, quote, facilitating, unquote, the evasion of sanctions on Russian oil. Madam President, my concern is with this second provision. There is a fatal absence of specificity as to what countries could be considered facilitators, or what conduct or the extent of that conduct that could constitute being a facilitator. In the bill text, the new tariffs would apply to, quote, countries in which foreign persons are knowingly engaging in transactions, activities, or services that circumvent or assist any third party to circumvent any sanction related to oil that originated in the Russian Federation. This language is very general. In effect, this would be a blanket delegation of congressional tariff authority to the executive, all in the name of targeting a facilitator that the executive could target and tariff any country for any reason under the methodology of this language. Congress cannot and Congress must not give this type of blanket delegation of tariff authority to this executive, or for that matter, to any chief executive. Madam President, we are all very much indebted to Senator Graham and Senator Blumenthal for their relentless pursuit of a Russian sanctions bill, and to the many others who have fought to keep Ukraine at the center of the Senate's agenda. Colleagues like Senator Shaheen, Senator Wicker, Senator McConnell, Senator Whitehouse, Senator Risch, and Senator Murkowski, among others, have all been critical to protecting freedom in Ukraine and America's national security interest in Europe. But in all my own personal conversations with Senator Graham, and I suspect in all the discussions my colleagues had with Senator Graham, he was always focused on specific and binding language that would enable and it would require the executive to impose tariffs on buyers of Russian oil, not on undefined facilitators. Senator Blumenthal spoke to Senator Graham just before he died, has informed us that Lindsey was over the moon about this bill. But Madam President, you and I both know Senator Graham was really unique among us. Despite the open-ended language about facilitators, Senator Graham had a unique relationship with President Trump. And if any among us could have persuaded President Trump to carry out Congress's narrow and limited intent, it was Senator Graham. But without Senator Graham, our language must specify our intent and do so with absolute clarity. Go after the buyers. That was Senator Graham's goal. And we must have language that makes achieving that goal real. That is why when we take up the Graham-Blumenthal bill, I will offer an amendment to strike the overly vague delegation of tariff authorities to also target, quote, facilitators of sanctions evasions. As currently written, the facilitator provision enables the executive with full congressional authorization to impose any tariffs on any country for any reason, so long as the executive labels the tariff country a facilitator. If we delete the facilitator provision, as I propose, we do achieve Senator Graham's goal without his bill being used for any other purposes. In doing so, the bill will retain the original tariff authority that only targets buyers of Russian oil. Madam President, Senator Graham and many of us, myself included, agreed about maximizing the imperative of sanctions and tariff tools to hurt Putin and stop his aggression against Ukrainian civilians. And I hope we can honor Senator Graham by quickly coming together to pass a bipartisan bill that will specifically and effectively target the companies and countries that are buying the oil that Putin is using to pay for the missiles and the bombs that are raining down on the innocent people of Ukraine. Madam President, I yield.
Under the previous order, the Senate stands adjourned until 10:30 a.m. tomorrow.